There comes a moment in every soul's journey when life itself stops, being a story you control and becomes a silent test that no one else can take for you. There exists a profound and unspoken truth about the human journey, a test that every soul must one day face, a test that unfolds in absolute silence. This is not a trial that can be analyzed by therapists, explained in self-help books, or fully grasped even by those who love you most. It is a private initiation of the soul, invisible yet deeply transformative. Many live through years believing they are merely enduring difficult times, never realizing that they are in fact undergoing one of the most sacred and demanding examinations of consciousness. Through decades of study and observation, I've come to understand these invisible initiations, moments of deep inner reckoning that reshape an individual from the inside out. Some souls, I have found, pass through this transformation by walking through a doorway of profound suffering. This suffering leaves no visible scars, yet it alters everything within. The signs of such transformation rarely appear in ways the world can measure. They are subtle, almost imperceptible, often noticed only by those who have walked through similar fires. Perhaps you have already endured such a passage without even knowing it. Perhaps it is written not in words or achievements, but in your energy, the way you move through the world, the calm in your presence, the quiet authority in your gaze. These are not triumphs to boast of, but sacred recognitions that one's consciousness has been permanently changed through contact with its deepest truth. Over time, I have come to describe this awakening as a kind of second psychological birth, a rebirth of the self that happens quietly, without announcement or celebration. It unfolds not in moments of excitement, but in the stillness that follows storms, in the soft realizations that arrive when the noise fades, in that tender awareness that the person you have been striving to become has, in truth, been living quietly within you all along. The essential question, then, is not whether you are worthy of transformation, it is whether you can recognize that it has already begun. Like a tree that grows stronger after surviving a lightning strike, the psyche, too, develops a deeper kind of resilience. This is not the brittle strength that resists pressure or denies pain, but a flexible endurance that bends, adapts, and grows wiser from every challenge. It learns to transmute difficulty into growth, to turn poison into medicine, chaos into clarity. Those who emerge from this process are no longer defined by avoidance of pain, but by the alchemy of turning suffering into wisdom. The first sign of such an awakening reveals itself in one's relationship with solitude. Where loneliness once felt like a punishment, it begins to transform into a sanctuary. You start to sense that being alone is not the same as being abandoned, becomes a space for reflection, creation, and healing. In my research, I have often written about the abandonment complex, that deep wound which drives us to seek validation, approval, and constant connection. When this wound begins to heal, a profound shift occurs. You no longer chase after affirmation from others. Your energy stops scattering in 1,000 directions trying to be seen or loved. A particular quality of stillness emerges, an inner quiet, not born of withdrawal or despair, but of peace. It is the quiet confidence of someone who no longer feels the need to prove their worth to anyone, including themselves. In this new stillness, solitude becomes a source of creative power. You begin to realize that your best insights, your most authentic feelings, and your truest direction often arise not through noise or conversation, but through communion with the deeper parts of yourself, those inner voices that only speak when the external world falls silent. This capacity for meaningful solitude, I have found, is one of the clearest signs of an individuated soul. You start to notice how others run from themselves through constant activity, endless entertainment, or relationships that distract rather than connect. You do not judge them. Instead, you recognize in them the patterns you once lived yourself. And in that recognition comes compassion, both for them and for the person you once were. The great paradox, of course, is this: the more comfortable you become in your own company, the more magnetic you become to others. People are drawn to your calmness, your grounded energy, your self-contained light. They sense something in you, something real, something unshakable that they cannot quite name. And perhaps that is the truest sign of all. when you no longer need the world to fill your emptiness. The world begins to meet you differently. Your solitude is no longer loneliness. It is your power. Your peace, your sacred ground. There comes a moment, after one has walked through the silent trials of the soul, when even the body begins to tell a different story, your nervous system itself has recalibrated. Where once uncertainty triggered a rush of anxiety and the unknown felt like danger, now mystery has become an invitation. You approach the unfamiliar not with fear, but with what I call active imagination, a living curiosity that welcomes the in-between spaces of existence. You begin to feel at home in the liminal zones. Those thresholds where one version of yourself dissolves and another quietly begins to form. Transformation no longer frightens you. It fascinates you. These uncertain moments, what many would call chaos, become sacred to you, because you have learned that it is precisely there, in the dissolution of the old self, that the new self begins to emerge. The second sign of this deeper evolution reveals itself in your relationship with your own shadow. Much of my work has been devoted to shadow integration, the courageous process of acknowledging, accepting, and ultimately befriending the darker aspects of one's personality. After passing through your own inner trial, this integration begins to occur naturally within you. You start to see yourself with a brutal and liberating honesty. You no longer deny your capacity for manipulation, your hunger for power, or your ability to wound when threatened. These truths no longer horrify you, because you understand that they do not make you evil, they make you human. Instead of repressing these impulses, you begin to study them, to work with them consciously, and in doing so, they lose their destructive power. Your anger, once explosive or corrosive, transforms into what could be called a sacred fire. It no longer burns indiscriminately. It burns with purpose. It incinerates only what must be released, relationships that suffocate your growth, patterns that keep you small, outdated agreements made when you knew less about your own worth. This anger now serves your evolution instead of sabotaging it. It becomes a clean, clarifying force that clears the debris of your past and creates space for expansion. People around you begin to feel something different in your presence and energetic integrity. A grounded power that does not need to be announced. Even when you are silent, others sense your authenticity because you have made peace with your own contradictions. You no longer need to resolve every paradox within yourself. Instead, you hold them consciously, aware that true growth is not found in the elimination of tension, but in learning to live within it. The way you process emotion has changed at its core. What once destabilized you for days or weeks now moves through you, like a storm that knows its place in the ecosystem of your being. You no longer resist emotional intensity or fear. It will destroy you. Your inner container has expanded. It is strong enough to hold both grief and joy, rage and serenity, confusion and clarity. Your emotions, once tyrants that ruled you, have become partners in your evolution. You allow them to express themselves fully without letting them take possession of your consciousness. This is emotional maturity in its purest form, a dynamic balance between feeling deeply and staying centered amid the waves. The third sign of transformation appears as a growing immunity to projection. Projection is the unconscious act of casting one's own unacknowledged emotions or wounds onto others. Before your transformation, you may have been easily drawn into other people's chaos, taking responsibility for their emotions, internalizing their pain or confusing their stories for your own. Now, something has shifted. You've developed an almost scientific detachment, a keen ability to observe when someone is projecting onto you. You can recognize when their anger, admiration, or disappointment is not truly about you, but about the image they have constructed in their own mind. This awareness does not come with judgment or superiority. It comes with understanding. You see projection for what it is, a natural defense mechanism of an unintegrated psyche. Drama that once pulled you into its orbit now feels strangely distant, almost foreign. You observe the manipulations, triangulations, and emotional games of others with the quiet curiosity of a researcher watching nature unfold. Your compassion, too, has evolved. It is no longer the codependent compassion that sacrifices itself to rescue others, but a mature, grounded compassion that offers presence without losing itself in another's suffering. You can stand beside someone in pain without drowning in it. This I have called the transcendent function, the capacity to rise above dualistic conflict and perceive the larger patterns at work. It is activated within you each time someone brings their crisis to your door. You no longer experience their panic as your own. The old reflex to fix, to save, to carry has been replaced by a serene understanding of boundaries. You recognize the sacred balance between care and autonomy, between empathy and self-preservation. You know, now that wisdom often means allowing others to meet their own challenges, to walk through their own darkness, just as you once did. And in this recognition lies your quiet mastery, the mark of a soul that has moved from reaction to awareness, from entanglement to evolution. As you evolve through this quiet yet powerful transformation, you begin to notice a natural and graceful withdrawal from situations where your energy was once used to regulate or maintain someone else's emotional stability. This stepping back does not stem from indifference or cruelty, arises from clarity. You now understand the delicate line between genuinely supporting someone's growth and unconsciously enabling their avoidance of necessary lessons. Where you once felt responsible for the moods and well-being of others, you now recognize that rescuing someone from their discomfort often robs them of the very experience they need for their own evolution. This awareness becomes an act of compassion, the soft kind that sacrifices itself endlessly, but the mature compassion that honors both your boundaries and their potential to grow. Some people may misinterpret this newfound detachment as coldness, but you know it is the protection of something sacred within yourself, your energy, your peace, your truth, alongside this shift. Your relationship with time itself begins to transform in profound ways. Time no longer feels like an enemy chasing you, nor a scarce resource that must be managed or hoarded. Instead, it becomes a living, breathing dimension of your existence, something to be experienced fully rather than conquered. You slow down not because of laziness or fatigue, but because you have finally learned how to inhabit the present moment. The urgency that once drove your decisions dissolves into a deeper rhythm aligned with the natural unfolding of life. You start to trust that things happen according to an intelligence larger than your conscious planning. The constant push to be ahead, to control, to rush, gives way to a quiet confidence that life moves in divine time, and that your task is to align with it, not dominate it. From this trust, your intuition begins to bloom into its fullest expression. Where you once relied primarily on logic and analysis, you now consult an inner knowing that transcends the boundaries of rational thought. It is as if a new organ of perception has awakened within Yuan's invisible compass that orients you toward truth and coherence. Synchronicities start weaving through your life more frequently, to offering signs, confirmations, and subtle nudges that guide your path. You begin to distinguish between the noisy demands of the wounded ego and the gentle voice of the self. The archetype of wholeness that emerges when individuation deepens, your perception sharpens, but not in the analytical sense. You start sensing the unspoken, the emotional, and energetic undercurrents moving beneath people's words and actions. You can read motivations and patterns others cannot yet see, not from suspicion or cynicism, but through a refined sensitivity that perceives the truth beneath appearances. Decision-making transforms as well. You no longer need exhaustive lists of pros and cons. You listen to your intuitive intelligence, to your body, to the subtle shifts in your energy when something is right or wrong. It feels as though you've opened a direct channel to an ancient source of wisdom. What could be described as an inner council composed of ancestral insight and the collective unconscious. You become an attuned listener, not just to people, but to existence itself. You hear not only the words being spoken, but the silence between them, the emotion beneath explanation, the soul beneath the persona. This deep listening is not an act of judgment, but of reverent witnessing as your inner awareness matures. The fifth sign of transformation begins to show itself. You come into harmony with the cyclical nature of life. You integrate the archetype of death and rebirth so completely that you no longer fear endings. When chapters in your life dissolve, You no longer panic or resist. Instead, you recognize these dissolutions as sacred preludes to renewal. The unknown ceases to be a void of terror and becomes a fertile space of becoming. Where you once sought certainty and guarantees before acting, you now trust the unfolding mystery. You understand that real growth happens not in the safety of outcomes, but in the tension between decision and result. In this trust, an energetic economy takes root within you. You stop scattering your energy across dozens of draining commitments and relationships that no longer feed your evolution. Instead, you invest your life force with precision, like a wise gardener, tending only to what will bear meaningful fruit. You begin to see that growth is not linear, but spiral-shaped for visiting familiar themes at deeper and deeper levels. This realization brings with it tremendous patience and gentleness toward your own process. You no longer rush your evolution. You honor its rhythm. Creativity, too, transforms from a pursuit of recognition into a sacred dialogue with life itself. You no longer create to prove your worth, but because creation has become your form of communiona, a way of participating in the divine act of existence. Finally, the sixth sign emerges through a complete reorientation of how you relate to validation and worth. My contemporary, Alfred Adler, wrote about the inferiority complex, those hidden wounds that compel us to constantly compare ourselves, to prove that we matter. When this complex dissolves, you find that the impulse to measure your value against external standards simply vanishes. You develop what I have long called inner authority structure. Within the psyche that allows you to validate your experience independently of the world's approval, your self-worth no longer sways with the changing tides of public opinion. Praise and criticism, which once dictated your emotional weather, now touch you lightly, registering as information rather than judgment. This detachment does not make you indifferent, it makes you free. And in that freedom, an extraordinary amount of energy is release energy that once went into managing your image, seeking reassurance, or curating how others perceive you. Now that energy returns to its rightful home, your authenticity. You no longer edit yourself to fit expectations or shrink to make others comfortable. The performance ends. What remains is something rare, radiant, and unmistakably reallured truest self. Standing quietly and unapologetically in its own light, you begin to make a radical choice. One that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You choose rejection for who you truly are, over acceptance for a performance. There is a deep liberation in this. The masks that once protected you begin to fall away, and in their place, a new kind of honesty emerges. You stop trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for your true self. Instead of bending to be loved, you stand as you are, unfiltered, unapologetic, and free. This shift is not loud or defiant. It is calm, steady, and rooted in a quiet knowing that authenticity is worth more than approval. The way you inhabit your physical body begins to change. You feel a groundedness, a sense of belonging that comes not from others' validation, but from genuine self-possession. You move differently, slower perhaps, but with presence. Every step says, I belong to myself first. As this transformation unfolds, something even deeper begins to take shape. A refined sense of discrimination about where and how you invest your energy. You start to understand that not every connection deserves your time, and not every demand deserves your attention. This is the emergence of what can only be called energetic sovereignty, the sacred ability to protect your essence without aggression, simply through conscious choice. Your energy becomes precious, your presence intentional. You stop scattering yourself across countless directions and begin to channel your life force toward what truly matters. This isn't arrogance or elitism, it's wisdom. The wisdom of someone who finally understands that their energy is sacred and finite, and to waste it is to dishonor their own soul. From this inner alignment, a natural authority begins to emanate from you, not the kind that dominates others, but the quiet strength that comes from mastering yourself. The guilt that once accompanied setting boundaries dissolves like morning mist. You no longer apologize for protecting your peace. Instead, you do it with the same natural instinct one would protect any precious resource. You begin to recognize with striking clarity the people, projects, and situations that drain your vitality without giving anything meaningful in return. You let them go, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. You realize that peace is not something you stumble upon, it's something you curate through. Choices aligned with your truth. Even your relationship with pain transforms. What once felt like punishment now becomes guidance. Suffering no longer feels like an enemy, but a teacher, one who speaks in the language of growth and transformation. You stop running from discomfort and begin listening to what it's trying to reveal. This doesn't mean you seek out pain, but when it arrives, you meet it with curiosity instead of fear. You extract its lessons and emerge from each challenge with more depth, more clarity, more compassion. A stillness begins to follow you everywhere, not an absence of movement, but a profound centeredness. This stillness becomes magnetic. People sense it without understanding it. They are drawn to you, not because you have all the answers, but because you embody something rare, peace, born from integration. Your relationship with hope also matures. You no longer cling to fantasies or wishful outcomes. Hope becomes something active, a quiet faith in the unfolding of life itself. You trust your capacity to meet whatever arises. This marks your second psychological birth, the moment you become truly independent from the patterns, conditioning, and programming of your early life. You begin to live from the inside out. There's a deep sense of completion that arises, one not tied to achievements or validation, but to reconciliation within your own being. You stop needing to recover from your past because you finally understand that your power lies in creating from your present. The person you once thought you had to become fades away, revealed as a limitation compared to the truth of who you already are. You see now that you were never meant to be perfect, only whole. You have passed through the soul's most demanding examination and emerged not untouched, but integrated. Not unchanged, but more authentically yourself. The test revealed your true nature, that the soul doesn't grow in spite of suffering, but through a conscious and transformative relationship with it. Your pain becomes your teacher, your wounds your wisdom. You carry the quiet dignity of someone who has met themselves completely and found peace, not perfection. If you recognize yourself in these signs, know that you have crossed an invisible threshold that few ever will. You have undergone an initiation, one that marks the birth of the individuated soul. Your transformation is not just personal, it's archetypal. It lights the path for others who are still wandering in the dark, searching for themselves. And though you have arrived at a place of deep wholeness, your journey is far from over. It has only just begun, the journey of conscious evolution, where every breath, every choice, every moment becomes an act of sacred creation.